On the 1st of December in 1961, a farmer named Clem Varner pulled a 1948 vintage red row crop tractor into his shop in Bureau County, Illinois, set it up on stands, and started taking the engine apart. He was 34 years old. The tractor had been told it was finished by 3 separate people that fall: his brother-in-law, a cooperative mechanic, and the implement dealer in Princeton who had offered him $175 and said he was being generous. The engine had dropped compression on 2 cylinders. The front axle had developed a knock, and the rear main seal had been weeping since August. The dealer had said, "Clem, that machine has given what it has to give. You're throwing good money after bad." Clem had driven it home and started taking it apart. That was the first winter. He finished the rebuild in February and planted behind it in the spring of 1962. The engine ran clean. The front axle, which he had rebuilt with new kingpins and bushings, was quiet. The rear main seal, replaced with a new one he had ordered from a parts supplier in Peoria, did not weep. He did the same thing the following winter. Not to the same tractor. He had bought a second machine at an estate auction in the fall of 1962, a 1952 utility tractor with a seized hydraulic pump and a bent steering rod that the estate had been unable to sell because nobody wanted to deal with it. He had paid $380, brought it home, spent the winter on it, and had it running by March. He did this for 22 consecutive winters, every year between October and March. While the Bureau County fields were frozen and the fieldwork season was closed, Clem Varner was in the shop taking machines apart that other men had decided were finished and putting them back together as something useful. He never bought a new tractor. He never signed a finance agreement for a piece of equipment. He never made a monthly payment to a dealer or a bank for machinery. By the time he handed the farm to his son in 1983, the operation ran 4 tractors, 2 combines, and a full complement of implements. Every piece of it had been bought broken at auction or estate sale and rebuilt in the December through February window. Every piece of it was paid for. Let me tell you how this started, because it did not start as a system. It started as necessity. In the fall of 1960, Clem had been farming 160 Bureau County acres for 3 years. He had 2 pieces of equipment: a tractor he had bought, used at the start, and a pull-type combine that was approaching the end of its useful life. He had $2,200 in the operating account. A comparable new tractor at the dealer in Princeton cost $4,800 on a 4-year finance plan at 8%. A replacement combine ran similar numbers. He could not buy new. He could not afford the payments on new equipment and the operating costs of a 160-acre corn and soybean operation simultaneously. This was not a close calculation. The numbers did not work. What he could do was buy broken equipment at the prices broken equipment brought at Bureau County estate auctions in 1960, which were prices that reflected what the equipment was worth to someone who could not fix it, very little, rather than what it was worth to someone who could fix it, which was considerably more. He had grown up in his father's shop. His father, Ray, had been a repair-everything-yourself farmer of the kind common in the 1930s and 1940s, when buying new was not an option for most operations, and the alternative was learning to fix what you had. Ray had taught Clem to rebuild a carburetor at 12, to do a valve job at 14, to pull and replace an engine at 16. By the time Clem started farming on his own in 1957, he had 15 years of shop experience and no machinery debt. He looked at the price gap between broken equipment at auction and working equipment at a dealer and understood it as the market value of the knowledge required to bridge that gap. Broken equipment was priced for buyers who lacked that knowledge. He had the knowledge. The price gap was effectively what his knowledge was worth per machine. He started buying broken equipment. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer and tell me in the comments, have you ever bought something broken that everyone else passed on? Let me tell you about the 22 winters in specific terms, because the aggregate is impressive and the specific details are more impressive. Winter 1, 1961 to 1962. The seized 1948 vintage row crop tractor. Bored cylinders, new pistons and rings, front axle kingpins and bushings, rear main seal. Cost in parts, $187. Auction price, $175. Total investment, $362. Value running, approximately $1,100 in early 1962. Winter 2, 1962 to 1963. The 1952 utility tractor with seized hydraulic pump and bent steering rod, new hydraulic pump, straightened and re-drilled steering rod, full engine tune, cost in parts, $210, auction price, $380, total, $590, value running, approximately $1,600. Winter 3, 1963 to 1964. A pull-type combine with a broken feeder house drive chain and a cracked auger housing. Clem welded the housing himself. He had learned to weld in 1956 and had built a welder from plans in a farm mechanics magazine. New chain. Cost in parts and welding rod, $94. Auction price, $220. Total, $314. Value running, approximately $900. This was the pattern. Every fall, Clem attended the Bureau County Estate auctions and the surrounding county auctions within driving distance. He was looking for specific things, machines with known failure modes that he had the skills to address, priced at levels that reflected their broken state rather than their potential running state. He was not looking for bargains on running equipment. He was looking for machines that were broken in ways he could fix and priced accordingly. He kept a notebook of what he paid and what he spent and what the repaired machine was worth. By winter 7, the notebook showed a consistent pattern. The gap between the broken price and the running value was always larger than the cost of the repair, not by a small margin, by multiples. By winter 15, the operation had more equipment than a 160-acre farm needed. Clem had begun selling repaired machines to neighbors at prices below dealer cost. His cost was always lower than a dealer's replacement cost, so he could sell at a discount and still realize a profit on the repair work. The repair operation had become a secondary income stream, not large, but real. By winter 22, 1982 to 1983, Clem was 55 years old and his son Dale was 28 and had been farming the ground with him for 5 years. The shop held tools that Clem had accumulated across 22 winters, a boring bar, a valve grinding tool, a hydraulic press, a drill press, a welder, a parts washer. Every tool had been bought used or built from plans. None of it had been purchased new. Let me tell you about the almost quit moment, because there was one and it happened not during a repair, but during an auction. In the fall of 1974, Clem had gone to an estate auction in Henry County looking at a 1963 vintage large row crop tractor that had been advertised as needing engine work. He had looked at it the morning of the auction and had done his standard assessment. Pulled the oil cap, looked at the color of the oil on the dipstick, listened to the engine turn over by hand, checked the main bearing clearance with a pry bar on the crank pulley. His assessment was that the engine needed a complete rebuild. Bores, pistons, rings, bearings. But the block was sound, and the rest of the machine was in reasonable shape. He had set a limit of $1,400 in his mind. At $1,400 plus his estimated rebuild cost of $600, his total would be $2,000 for a machine worth approximately $4,500 running. The bidding had gone past $1,400. It had gone to $1,600. It had gone to $1,800. Clem had stopped bidding at $1,400 as he had planned. The tractor had sold to a dealer from Kewanee for $1,850. He had driven home without a machine. He had sat in the shop that evening with the notebook and looked at the numbers. At $1,850 plus $600 in rebuild costs, the total would have been $2,450 for a machine worth $4,500. Still a profitable rebuild. He had let it go because of a limit he had set before he had full information. He had thought for 2 weeks about whether he should raise his auction limits. He had thought about what the right framework was for setting limits. Was it a fixed dollar amount, or a percentage of estimated running value, or something else? He had talked to his father Ray about it. Ray was 72 in 1974, retired, but still sharp. Ray had listened to the whole thing. He had said, "You stopped at the number you set before you knew what you were looking at." Clem had said, "Yes." Ray had said, "That's the right discipline." He had said, "The number you should change is the rebuild cost estimate, not the auction limit." He had said, "Your $600 estimate is too conservative. A rebuild on a machine that size costs $800 to $900 done right. When you set the auction limit, set it against the actual cost, not the optimistic cost." Clem had gone back to the notebook and recalculated his auction limits for the machines he typically bought, using $850 as the rebuild cost rather than $600. The limits were lower than he had been setting. He had been setting limits that left less margin than he had thought. He had not changed his approach. He had sharpened it. He had become more disciplined about the numbers, not less. He had bought his next machine at the right price the following spring. He had rebuilt it correctly. The margin was what he had calculated. Ray had been right. The discipline was right. The number that needed adjusting was the cost estimate, not the limit. Let me tell you about what Dale inherited when Clem handed over in 1983, because the inheritance was not just equipment. Dale had been in the shop with Clem every winter from the time he was old enough to hand tools. He had done his first carburetor rebuild at 11, his first valve job at 15, his first complete engine pull and replacement at 17, under Clem's supervision, on a tractor they had bought at auction the previous fall. By the time Clem handed over the farm in 1983, Dale had participated in 14 of the 22 winter rebuilds. He knew how to assess a machine at auction, what to look for, what to listen for, what to check with a pry bar or a compression gauge or a visual inspection of the oil cap. He knew how to estimate rebuild costs accurately. He knew how to order parts from the suppliers Clem had relationships with. He also knew, from having watched Clem do it for 22 years, what the discipline looked like from the inside. The early mornings in December, when the shop was cold and the disassembly was going to take 3 days before you could even fully assess what the machine needed. The February evenings when the reassembly was not quite right, and you had to pull something apart again and start over. The specific patience required to spend 4 months on a machine that you had bought broken and were turning into something that worked. He had watched Clem do this 22 times. He understood that it was not clever or inspired or particularly dramatic. It was systematic. It was patient. It was the same process applied to the same problem with better and better information and better tools every year for 22 years. Dale has farmed the Bureau County ground since 1983. He has rebuilt machines every winter since Clem taught him to, not always to replace, sometimes to supplement, sometimes to sell, sometimes simply because a machine he was running needed winter attention to be ready for spring. He has never bought a new tractor. He has never made an equipment payment. Clem had said to him in the shop in the winter of 1982, the last winter they worked together before the handover, "The dealer is in the business of selling you what he has at what it costs him to have it." He had paused. "I'm in the business of fixing what nobody else wants at what it costs me to fix it." He had looked at Dale. "The margin between those two prices is ours if we do the work." Dale has been doing the work since 1983. The shop is the same shop. The tools are the same tools, plus the ones Dale has added across 40 more winters. The notebook Clem started in 1961 is in the filing cabinet. Dale's notebooks are beside it. The dealer in Princeton, who offered Clem $175 for the 1948 tractor in 1961 and said he was being generous, closed in the late 1980s. The franchise changed hands and eventually closed. The shop is still open. The work is still being done. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer. Hit the bell. Tell me in the comments, does anyone in your family spend their winters in the shop the way Clem spent his? The dealer said, "You're throwing good money after bad." Clem said, "I'm spending the winter in the shop." 22 winters, 4 tractors, 2 combines, a full complement of implements, no payments, no debt. The margin between the broken price and the running price, taken home in December and returned in March as something that worked, that is the whole system. It is not complicated. It requires the shop and the tools and the knowledge and the discipline and the patience to do it correctly 22 times in a row. Clem had all 5. Dale has all 5. The shop is open every winter. It will be open this winter. Let me tell you about the economics of 22 winters in precise terms, because the numbers are the argument, and they deserve to be laid out clearly. Clem's first notebook entry was November 30th, 1961. The last entry in his final notebook was March 12th, 1983. 22 winters, 44 notebooks. He filled 1 per year, incoming machine on the left page, outgoing valuation on the right. The notebooks are in the filing cabinet in the shop. Dale has read every one. Across the 22 winters, Clem rebuilt or significantly repaired 31 machines. Not all of them were kept. Some were sold to neighbors. Some were sold at auction after a year or two on the farm. 3 went back into the auction cycle when something better came along. The net result was that the farm ended 1983 with 4 running tractors, 2 running combines, and a full complement of field implements, all of it in working condition, all of it paid for, none of it financed. The total Clem spent on machine purchases across 22 winters, $9,840. The total he spent on parts and machine shop work, $14,220. Total invested in the equipment operation from 1961 through 1983, $24,060. The estimated replacement value of the equipment on hand in 1983 at dealer prices for comparable used equipment in running condition, $87,000. The gap between $24,060 invested and $87,000 in hand was $62,940. The cumulative value of 22 winters of shop work applied to machines priced for buyers who could not do the work. Against this, consider the alternative, a conventional equipment financing path from 1961 through 1983, buying new or near-new equipment at dealer prices on 4-year finance plans at prevailing interest rates, replacing as equipment aged, would have produced roughly comparable working capacity at an estimated total cost of $180,000 to $220,000 in purchase prices and finance charges across the same 22 years. The gap between $24,060 and $200,000 is the value of knowing how to fix things. Clem had said it differently. He had said, "The dealers charge you for what you cannot do. Everything you learn to do yourself is money you do not pay them." He had paused. Spend your winters learning. Spend your springs and summers using what you learned. He had said, 20 winters of that and you owned something. 22 winters of that, he owned something. Let me tell you about the specific tools Clem built or bought, because the tools are the infrastructure of the system, and without them, the system does not work. The boring bar was the first major tool acquisition. In 1964, after the 3rd winter rebuild, Clem had determined that paying the Peoria machine shop to bore cylinders was the largest single cost in most engine rebuilds, and that if he could bore cylinders himself, he could reduce his rebuild costs by approximately 30%. He had bought a used boring bar from a closed machine shop in Galesburg for $340 in the spring of 1964. He had practiced on a scrap block for 3 weeks before using it on a paying job. He had bored his first cylinder properly in July of 1964. He had bored every cylinder on every engine rebuild since. The hydraulic press came in Winter 6, 1966 to 1967, when a rebuild required pressing a kingpin that he could not remove with hand tools. He built the press from channel iron and a 12-ton hydraulic jack following plans from a farm mechanic's manual. Total materials cost $67. He has used it on every winter rebuild since. The valve grinding tool came in Winter 8, when he had been hand-lapping valves and had concluded the results were not consistent enough. He bought a used valve grinder from the same Galesburg shop that had sold him the boring bar. Cost $180. The quality of his valve jobs improved immediately and measurably. He could check the grind with a dial indicator rather than estimating by feel. By Winter 15, The shop had every tool required to do a complete engine rebuild from teardown to startup, without sending any component out to a machine shop. This was the point at which his rebuild costs dropped to their lowest level. He was supplying only parts and his own labor, with no machine shop charges. This is what 22 years of tool acquisition looks like when each tool is chosen to eliminate a specific cost from a specific process, not a collection of tools for general use. A specific set of tools for a specific job, built up over 2 decades of doing the job and identifying what was missing. Dale has the same shop. He has added some tools and updated some others. The boring bar has been replaced with a newer version, the welder upgraded twice. The process has not changed. Let me tell you the last thing, which is what Clem said when I asked him whether he had ever regretted not buying new equipment. He had been 76 years old, sitting in the shop that had housed 22 winters of rebuilds, the same shop Dale was still using. He had looked at the tools on the wall, the boring bar, the valve grinder, the hydraulic press he had built from channel iron in 1966. He had said, "Regret what?" He had looked at me. He had said, "I spent my winters in the shop." He paused. Other men spent theirs watching television or waiting for spring. He had looked at the tools. He had said, "I came out of every winter with something that worked, something I had built from something broken." He paused. "That's not something I regret." He had said, "The dealer in Princeton thought I was throwing good money after bad in 1961. He had looked at the filing cabinet with the notebooks. He had said, 31 machines. Not one of them was bad money. He paused. Some of them were better investments than anything I did in the fields. He had said one more thing. He had said, "A man who can fix things is never entirely dependent on the people who sell things." He had paused. That matters more than any single machine. It does. It has mattered to Dale for 40 more winters since Clem taught it to him. It will matter to whoever Dale teaches it to next. The shop is open. The tools are on the wall. The notebooks are in the filing cabinet. The dealer in Princeton is closed. 22 winters, 31 machines, no payments. The margin between broken and running, taken home in December, returned in March as something that works. That is the whole thing. Let me tell you about 2 specific winter rebuilds in detail, because the pattern is clearest when you can see individual examples rather than the aggregate. Winter 11, 1971 to 1972. Clem had bought at a Whiteside County estate auction a 1957 large row crop tractor with a known cracked head. The head crack had been the reason no dealer would touch it and the reason the estate had been unable to sell it at any reasonable price. It had sold for $290, less than scrap value for the engine block alone if the block had been sound. Clem had done his inspection before the auction and had found what the dealer in attendance had not looked for. The crack was in the head, not the block. A cracked head is a straightforward replacement. A cracked block ends the engine. These are not the same failure. He had bought the tractor at $290, trucked it home, and sourced a replacement head from a parts supplier in Rock Island who had a core. The replacement head cost $85 plus $40 in machine shop work to resurface and cut the valve seats. Total parts cost $125. Total investment, $415. The tractor was running by February 15th. Running value, approximately $2,200 in early 1972. The dealer who had passed on the tractor at $290 had not been able to see the difference between a cracked head and a cracked block. Clem had been able to see it because he had been looking at engine failures for 10 winters and knew what the distinction meant. Winter 16, 1976 to 1977. A 1961 combine with a completely seized threshing cylinder. The cylinder had been run into green corn and had jammed so hard that the drive shaft had sheared. The estate had priced it at $150 and nobody had bid. Clem had looked at the cylinder and determined that the jam was external. Crop material packed between the cylinder bars and the concave, not a mechanical failure of the cylinder itself. He had freed the cylinder in 4 hours with a pry bar and heat from a torch. The sheared drive shaft had been replaced with a new piece from a parts supplier for $55. The combine had needed a thorough cleaning and a tune of the separating system. Total parts cost $71. Total investment, including purchase, $221. Running value, approximately $1,800. The estate had not been able to sell it at $150. Clem had fixed it for $71 in parts and 4 hours of work. These are not exceptional examples. They are representative examples. Across 31 machines, the pattern held. The broken price reflected what the equipment was worth to someone who could not fix it, and the running price reflected what it was worth to someone who could. The gap between those prices was, in every case, larger than the cost to bridge it. Clem had said, "I was never buying broken machines. I was buying running machines at broken prices." He had paused. Other men couldn't see the running machine inside the broken one. He looked at the tools on the shop wall. He said, "That's what the tools are for. They let you see what the machine can be instead of what it is. The tools let you see what the machine can be instead of what it is." That is the sentence. It took Clem 22 winters to earn the right to say it. He had said it to Dale. Dale has been saying it in his own way for 40 winters since. The shop is on the Bureau County farm. The filing cabinet has 44 notebooks from Clem's winters and 40 notebooks from Dale's winters, 84 winters of the same work in the same shop. The dealer in Princeton who called it throwing good money after bad in 1961, the building that housed his franchise is a feed supply store now. The shop is still the shop. The work is still being done. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer. Hit the bell. A man who can fix things is never entirely dependent on the people who sell things. Clem said that. He meant it. He proved it 22 times. Dale is proving it still. Let me tell you about the winter discipline itself, because the discipline is what made 22 winters possible, and it deserves its own accounting. Clem started every winter rebuild on the 1st of December. Not the first reasonable day in December, the first. He had a rule. The machine comes into the shop on December 1st, and the tear-down begins on December 1st. Not after the holidays, not after the weather settles. December 1st. He had this rule because he had learned in the second winter that starting late compressed the available time in ways that produced rushed reassembly. And rushed reassembly produced machines that were not quite right when you needed them in April. The timing of the work was not flexible. The field schedule in spring was not flexible. Therefore, the shop schedule in winter could not be flexible either. He had started on December 1st for 22 consecutive years. In 1969, December 1st fell on a Monday. Clem had been sick with a fever. He had gone to the shop at 7 a.m., started the teardown, worked for 4 hours, and gone back to bed. He had been back in the shop the following morning. He had not lost the day. He had not broken the rule. Dale has the same rule. December 1st, teardown begins. He has been doing this since 1983. Not every winter requires a full rebuild. Some years the equipment is in good shape and the winter work is thorough maintenance rather than rebuilding. But the December 1st rule applies to maintenance as much as to rebuilds. The work starts when it needs to start to finish, when it needs to finish. This is what 22 winters of discipline produces: a farmer whose equipment is ready in April because his shop is open in December, not because he is talented or because he has better machines than his neighbors, because he starts the work when the work needs to start and he does not stop until the work is done. The dealer in Princeton had said, "You're throwing good money after bad." Clem had gone to the shop on December 1st and started the teardown. He had done this 22 times. Dale has done it 40 times more. Between them, 62 winters of December 1st shop openings on the same Bureau County farm. The dealer is closed. The shop opens every December. That is the whole story.